God, now I'm in something completely different.
Well, that's because I'm going to see if we can work this way. Now do you have the...
Now everything looks great.
Yeah, you see the big Charles Sheeler now, I hope.
I see Charles Sheeler and you.
Well, okay, just look at Charles Sheeler.
Okay, I'm just sorry.
Every time is an adventure, believe me. So you ready to go? You ready to launch? Let's go. Back to Sheeler. Who's, obviously, this is a portrait of him. And I thought it's really quite fine. Of course, he's posed for this, but look at that. Would you ever call that an artist posture or an artist garb? I mean, look at the meticulous way he's approaching this whole thing. And that's just the quality, the essence of his art, you'd think is right there in what he does. Well, I happened to find an early painting of his.
Yes, see.
This is from about 1910, so he's still in his student years, and he's in Paris, has seen Cézanne and has seen Matisse, and he's exploring that. And you see the apples there, you've got Cézanne's apples, and you see the color, and he's trying to work out the gradations and the three-dimensionality with the colors, and the tilt is a little bit like something Matisse would do, but that's not his nature. I don't remember myself ever actually looking closely at one of his paintings in person. Now I have to, because when I look at a work like this, his Upperdeck from 1929, where he said he thought he'd finally realized what he wanted to do in painting. I mean, he'd made it an actuality. He'd achieved his goal. I would never know that was an oil painting. I don't think I wonder if there's any place where you could any of that sort of like personal touch. It looks as sort of factual and impersonal as the photograph on which he based it. However, looking at this, of course, I'm staring and staring and staring, because I know that he made adjustments between the photographs. He used the photographs and then was exploring, and not exactly trying to make a reproduction of the photograph in painting, but was exploring what's different in a representation between a photo and a painting. And the only thing I came up with was, if you look around just this area here, silhouette against the sky, and here, where he's just slightly magnified the form, given it a kind of a little halo. And he sort of does that over here. Since I think it's possible the image is cropped slightly, I don't trust things I can find around the corners. But I believe the changes are very small, and the light-dark values, the casting of the shadows, and the shapes are the same in both. So you see why he's lumped with a few other artists as precisionists, a name not made by them grouping together, but by scholars and museum curators going through their tasks of classifying. Well, I think this, I'm just responding to a remark at the end last time. Someone said, oh, that looks like Andrew Wyeth. And it does. But the reason is not because they're contemporaries. Andrew Wyeth is a lot younger than Sheeler. But their interest was in this solidity, these solid geometric forms of the barns and vernacular architecture in the same part of southern Pennsylvania. So Sheeler was renting a house in Doylestown. I hope some of you have been to the Mercer Museum, which is a marvelous industrial everything inside. And it was Charles Mercer who put that museum together, who rented out an 18th century farmhouse to Charles Sheeler. But so he's drawn to this same kind of almost like machine precision in something as simple as early American architecture. So it's his core aesthetic. So this is what we were whipping through at the end. That very good commission he got in the late 20s for a man who's self-trained as a photographer. I would consider this a very fine commission to go up and photograph this enormous, world's largest factory in River Rouge outside Detroit to create Model A's. And I want to, looking here at these conveyor belts, we'll see what he does with them. We'll see those towers here. The railroad tracks, I think, must be running along the opposite side down here. But I'm just repeating myself from last time to give myself another chance to look at these. Sheeler is responding to the beauty of machinery, the potential of machinery. And he probably, even in choosing this view, is choosing to dwarf the man who's working at it down here, as if the machinery can be working totally on its own. Or this one, or that one with the conveyor belts. So I did say this last time, a little bit, maybe I should have waited a moment, but when Sheeler said that the factories are, and machinery are cathedrals, because look at this, and then look in, so that's 1927, this photograph. He was in Paris, outside Paris in 1929, and he photographed Chartres Cathedral. Look, he goes for that same radiating forms, the same, as if there's a kind of an ur quality for him in this. And there are other images where he finds this in what he looks at. So there's a very personal vision. There's nothing that's, much as it looks as if it's concentrating only on the impersonal, the constructed, it's seen from a very particular aesthetic. And now you see the well, the one we first saw was cropped there, and I can't see this one over here, but I know I didn't show it to you. I see your faces instead. This triptych, this three-part panel, talking about something being like a religious, that's a shape of a traditional Christian altarpiece, a three-part scene like this. But this was Sheeler's submission to that show at the Museum of Modern Art in 1932 about paintings and murals made by American painters and photographers. So he's getting recognition. But now, today I want to look more at the paintings he did. First ones that he based on those River Rouge photographs he took. This one is just called American landscape. No, American landscape. And as you look at this, again, you're not going to see, this is an oil, and you're not going to see evidence of that. The colors are so carefully blended. You don't see strokes. He must be using the paint. It's such thin paint that he's working with. But I was looking at the composition, the scene overall. Again, there's a person, look. I was about to say there was nobody here, but there's a man. One in a nice space, I guess, so we'll notice him. And all the detritus of industry all around this. But looking at the composition overall, oh, this is such a planned, careful scene. This is a landscape, right? So we have as if a horizon now made all of machinery. And we have the vertical, as if columns in a classical temple over here. We have the gray picked at this corner, that's picked up over here. So this moves across and just as simple, it's not exactly bisected composition, but it's very prominent, a kind of a grid underlying this. And then with the water and the receding perspective here, you have these diagonals that suggest motion and rush and speed. And so you have these dynamism. So you have something against a stable, static system, and then that movement. Look how he lines just the one bit of color up right under this. Look how it happens that the smoke from the stack is easily distinguished from the clouds. He's made sure that they don't merge. So each part is so carefully done. Then, so these are 1932. And then he does this one. This is just called classic landscape. And it's just, he's taken a different angle from the same sort of thing with those zooming tracks on the diagonal and the crisp edges of the mounds of all these materials in here. And now you've got this diagonal coming in. And you have one coming up here. Pretty much, it's got those clouds pretty much. Oh, so it's a cloud front, but this is if that's coming in on a diagonal as well. So what he had said way back when he did, way back in 1929, when he did that Upperdeck one, he said he'd achieved his goals, which was, I had come to feel that a picture could have incorporated in it the structural design implied in abstraction. Well, that's the structural design. And presented in a wholly realistic manner. So he's got a very good balance of the two here. This third one he did too with us. Now you see those towers again. He's repeating the forms. The triangles occur here again and again. Okay, so what's this all about? Well, I'm going to show you some more pictures of this woman in a moment. If you went to the exhibition at the Jewish Museum before we were all shut down, you might have seen this. This is a woman named Edith Halpert, and I'll talk about her in a moment. But she agreed to represent Sheeler in her gallery. And she asked one thing of him, or encouraged one thing of him, which is that he essentially put photography aside, because photography still was thought of as a lesser art form and something that, after all, the camera did rather than the human eye or the human hand. And to convert his focus more toward painting. The one that you just saw, the classic landscape, just a little of that is visible over here. Then I'm going to show you this painting. I have no idea what this red, where that's coming in from. It's obviously in my setup somewhere. And this is called New York. Yeah. View of New York. What's here? This is his camera, his big view camera, now shrouded, showing that he's not using it. But that same interest in mechanism here, and it's just out into the sky. You don't have any idea of the city. But so he worked in photography, in painting, and in film, and in drawing. So he was quite versatile. And I'm sorry, we're going to have an accompaniment again for I don't know how long. Then I want to show you two other paintings by him. After he and his wife moved up north of Manhattan, he sort of started, he moved out of the Pennsylvania Dutch country, but his enthusiasm for early America was just flourishing, and he's started to collect Shaker objects. And he's in his house, and there are Shaker rugs here and a rag rug here. There's a Shaker salt box, the backgammon game. This is a Shaker bench back here. And to get this view, which looks like something it would, as if it were an abstract two-dimensional view with this sort of, well, it's actually more like a rectangle than a trapezoid here, which seems to go up, doesn't it, instead of along the ground, and all ground disappears. He stood on the staircase and then photographed and then painted what he saw looking down to get that modernist design sense out of it. But also because he just revered the simplicity of these early designs and wanted to focus on them. Here's another one. He did the same kind of odd angle by tilting his camera abruptly. Here's a early Pennsylvania Dutch pottery down here. Those rugs again. So it's very destabilizing. And then I wanted just a little more of his photography. I'd say he succeeded very well, continuing throughout actually the 30s. And at the Modern gave him a retrospective in 39. And then about that same time, Forbes magazine gave him a commission to do a kind of a photo essay, then converting them into paintings on the theme of power. So this is his on wheels. So it's of course, this manifestation of what is the speed of the age, but almost just only the puff of smoke that this suggests that anything would be moving here. And he's got his simple geometric forms. You see how he loves them. And this is the painting that developed from that, called Rolling Power, which he extended. And oh, I guess I left out the other one. So we're back to this woman, Edith Halpert. I'll show you a couple of other images of her. Here she is. And here, oh, fancy what that's there behind her. That's a Stuart Davis. You can recognize a Stuart Davis. And then here she is. This is the other powerful woman that I didn't mention in the first lecture, whose power behind the whole development of modern art, especially in the East Coast scene. So Edith Halpert was born in Odessa, and her family suffered in the pogroms in 1905. So she and her mother and her sister came and settled in New York. They were not the completely impoverished immigrants, but of course it was very difficult for them. This woman, she was some powerhouse. She went to school here. She went to the National Academy, so she studied art, and then she went to the Art Students League, and she met a man there named Samuel Halpert, a painter, and obviously she married him to get her name. Her name was, she changed it along the way, but it was a polysyllabic Russian name. While her husband painted, she went to work to support them. And she worked at Bloomingdale's, she worked in an advertising agents, she introduced dictaphones into business. What else did she do? She found herself finally in an investment banking, and she became a partner, And when she died at the age 70, she was a multimillionaire. Well, her husband didn't like her working, so she quit. Well, she could. She had all that money. I mean, she just that drive and the skill and just business acumen. She was marvelous. So with some of that money that she took away from her not very many years of being in the business world, they went to Paris for a year and went to Montmartre. They both were doing some painting, and she there began to see how different the situation was for French artists, that the contemporary young French artists found little galleries or paint shops that would show their works, and they got some kind of recognition and so they had people to sell their work and people to show their work. When they came back, another part of the backdrop story for this is that the next summer they went up to Algonquin, Maine, to the artist colony there, where the Zorroks were among the artists. And the particular group that were clustered there, like-minded artists, had a great interest in early American art, and they collected it. So that's the story. Oh, I left out one thing. She was also a member of Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney's studio club that she, as another woman practicing art like Gertrude Vanderbilt, enjoyed spending their time down there and working together. Well, what she decided to do was take more of that bonus money she had and establish a gallery. It's called the Downtown Gallery, which was founded in 27, down on 13th Street. It was the first commercial art gallery in Greenwich Village. And she showed, and it was the only gallery in New York that showed the work of contemporary living American artists. And let me see, I have something that she wrote in her blurb about this. The Downtown Gallery has no prejudice for anyone's school. Its selection is driven by quality, by what is enduring, not by what is in vogue. So you sort of sense her advertising background there. And she was clever. Then upstairs from her, she and two friends founded another gallery called the American Folk Art Gallery. What she's doing that is so clever is she's scarfing up works by people for no money, because these are artists who were just getting going, and there was no great interest in American folk art yet either. So that was really cheap to get a hold of. So she was cornering the market, sensing what was going to come in. And one of the people who came in the door, especially to go upstairs, was Abby Aldrich Rockefeller. Now, I don't suppose anybody stayed up at night wondering, like, how did she get interested in modern art that she wanted to found a museum, the Museum of Modern Art, against her husband's extreme displeasure? Well, it is because Edith Halpert had taught her to appreciate and to enjoy both she already was interested in the folk art, but contemporary American artists. And she persuaded her, she really pushed her toward the founding of the Museum of Modern Art. This woman also had a later effect. She got involved in the WPA. She started taking New York art out to the Midwest, making Midwest contacts. She was a real wheeler and dealer for sure. But why I before was showing you this is because that was that decisive move. So she really, like a good gallery owner, she guided her artists, and so she guided Sheeler toward painting. Yeah, that's to show her interest in folk art. And she supported Stuart Davis when Davis really could not sell very well, but she just kept showing. She was a very loyal person in working with him. There's another artist of hers was Shahn, whom we're about to move into. And then the artist who can look after that, Jacob Lawrence, was also her artist. So you sort of get the sense that our idea of who the major New York 30s artists are was shaped by the fact that she dealt with them. So now we come to Ben Shahn, who was born in Lithuania. His father came to the US before the rest of the family came, but they were in the more poor immigrant class. They had to leave, they were from the Pale in Lithuania, but his father had been sent to Siberia for a while because he was an ardent anti-Tsarist activist, and Ben Shahn undoubtedly inherited that deep, deep political drive from his father. Here he is looking extremely affable. So when he came to this country, he also went to the National Academy. So he had some very traditional training in art, but he was, to make money, working for his uncle, who was a lithographer. So his learning how to use print and working in something that was essentially linear came to him very early. His father had been a woodworker, so there was this kind of like art sense in the family. But then he went to City College, and he did have this interest. Well, he went to Woods Hole for a couple of summers, but his interest in art won out. And he married, and he and his wife went for several years living in Algeria, in France, several years spending in Europe. Then he came back. He had been given an opportunity to show his early works by one of the more avant-garde galleries in Manhattan, and he refused it because he was afraid that popularity, I guess he assumed he would be popular, would sway his development into things he didn't really want to do. So we're starting with the things he really wanted to do. And these are the works that I suppose most made his early fame. Those are the paintings he did in response to the Sacco and Vanzetti case. And this is an early painting from the series. I'll tell you more about it. He did 23 small paintings related to this case in the 20s. That had been a cause célèbre and was causing demonstrations and protests all over Europe, more so than in this country. These were two Italian-American immigrants who were arrested for murder and robbery in Braintree, Massachusetts in the 20s. And the evidence for them was really flimsy. And there was also, I think there was some, and circumstantial, I think there was actually some evidence that didn't come to court that would have supported their claims of innocence. But these men were anarchists. And they were arrested, and the weight of the law came down on them. They were sentenced by a man named Thayer, Judge Thayer. They were given a sentence to be electrocuted. And then there was a commission called the Lowell Commission, because of this furor, that reviewed it all. And the Lowell Commission, the men on the Lowell Commission, agreed with Thayer that not to stay the execution, that these men should be killed. And they were. So we'll see more about how that is involved here. But just looking at this painting, first, what you should see, or next, I guess you should see, is this. It's a slightly cropped photograph of the two men. And you can see, look at the chain here, the expressions on their faces. That's his source. So we have another artist who's using photography as a source for painting. But with Ben Shahn, it is that he's taking photographs from the news, current events. He is an ardent political activist himself and a profoundly believing communist later. He got hauled in front of the commission in the 50s to explain himself. But he was, his art was really put in the service of social justice. It was his way of reaching people with his message, as his father had used other means. And that's one of the reasons he's called a social realist. Now, this social realist is a title that's, again, made up by an outsider, not by one of the people who are lumped under that. But generally, the social realists are thought of as artists whose interest is to illustrate, to arouse, to document the human condition, especially of the poor, the oppressed, the outcast. Some do that more than others, but certainly Ben Shahn does. So here, there's this, even though there's a lot of change in his style over the years, there are certain qualities that you say, oh, you can recognize the Ben Shahn. It's always, you see that interest in line. He really draws a lot. And then it's as if the color, which is loosely brushed in, is just separate. And sometimes in his later works, it doesn't even correspond in the areas with where the line drawing is. But that's almost like a modernist thing. It makes it not vivid with life, but it's like a painting. It's a man-made artifact by somebody drawing and somebody painting and basing it on something else. He returned to that even in the 50s and here. So he often returned to themes and reused works he'd done earlier. So this is part of what was said. So I believe you can read that, right? And I think it reads as if it's a transcription of something that was spoken, because you see here, justus. And if you read it, I might have lived out my life. So he's trying to show these are people for whom English is a second language. I might have died. And then it's very hope at the end. That last moment belongs to us. That agony is our triumph. It's really a very noble statement. I hope you have a chance to read that all. So they are martyrs. And this is the painting that's in the Museum of Modern Art of this series that's best known. And this one's just called The Passion of Sacco and Vanzetti. This shows those three men in that commission, the Lowell Commission. And here's Sacco and Vanzetti in their coffins. And with extraordinary sanctimony, these guys are presenting lilies, this Christian symbol of resurrection. This is a portrait of the judge back here, as if he's taking his oath of honor. And of course, they believed he was completely corrupt. This painting, and then two others from the Sacco and Vanzetti series, were ones that Ben Shahn showed in that mural show. You're gonna be so tired of hearing about that mural show at the Modern in '32. And this is one of the three that caused some of the trustees to want the show to be canceled. That they wanted, the painting was just too outrageous to them, because these three members of the Lowell Commission were good friends with a number of the trustees of the Modern. But the director of the show and the director of the Modern and the money behind the Modern, to their great credit, would not withdraw this painting or the other two that were also considered politically inflammatory. And instead, some of the trustees withdrew their support from the museum. But look at that. Oh. Telling you how I feel about these people. Here's something he wrote in his defense. Said this when the uproar was at its height. The subject that I chose is an aspect of modern life that stirred my feelings deeply. I painted it with all the sincerity and skill I possessed. And in my judgment, there's no reason in the world why a mural on this subject should not be exhibited. Well, the full work, as he envisioned it, was never exhibited until it became a mosaic at Syracuse University in 1967, as you see it here. But in looking at this, well, I guess maybe not. I'm thinking, try to get in your minds, thinking, are you looking at that and saying, did this guy have training as an artist? I mean, like, what's wonky with this perspective here that's shooting, diminishing off to the side at an oblique angle and not the way we'd be seeing it from here? What about this wobbly little base for this column? It's not parallel there. What about the articulation of the body? For anyone who went to studied at the National Academy where drawing was everything, boy, they would know about human anatomy. Or the abrupt shift from light to dark. What about all those criteria for fine painting or fine drawing or fine composition? These figures smunched up here in the foreground and then this just as a backdrop. This is all so intentional. I wouldn't be carrying on like this if it weren't intentional. But Shahn, another aspect of his public orientation in his art is that he wanted something that didn't look like fine art. He wanted it to have the quality of folk art, to look spontaneous, to look as if a person like the observer, a person not going to museums, could look at this, could do something like this, could respond in this way. So aesthetically, emotionally, intellectually. And he did another series that never did get, he persisted in doing some of these that were just so inflammatory that no one would take them. This is called, he did it, the final one is called Apotheosis, but it was intended, and it's about 5 feet long, I think. It's out in San Francisco right now in a museum, but it was intended to be a mural. It wasn't commissioned and no one would take it. But this, the case of Tom Mooney is one that also was in the press for a very long time. It was not contemporary. Tom Mooney, this was in 1916. His offense was, he was arrested for throwing a bomb, which caused a number of casualties, deaths. But the evidence was extraordinarily circumstantial. It was clear that the jury was corrupt, the judge was corrupt, the police were corrupt, and he was railroaded. He was imprisoned until nearly his death. Finally, he was let out, but it was really too late for him to get much life out of it. Again, this is like this triptych form. He's as if the central figure on a throne, like Christ on a throne. This is of a good Jewish fellow doing this, but calling on the traditions in Western art. And look how he plays with the perspective, this deep space here. And then, I don't know if you're able, well, no. I hope it's just myself who's going to have the gallery covering the final part of the picture over here to the right. But there is, at the right, the same figure who is shown here, and that's Tom Mooney's mother. Look how this disjunction between one piece and another, It's a really distinctive way to work. And there is some folk art like this. Not a lot, but some. This is Tamuni's mother. And that's based on I think you can kind of sense that that's based on a photograph. And it was the photograph taken by someone standing up higher than she must have been a little tiny lady looking down on her. And that's why her legs would be so small as you, from the angle, the distortion that comes in the camera angle. And this part called demonstration. Oh, you know, these are fine identifiable portraits, and they are. This was taken from another newspaper picture of a May Day celebration in 1932. Nothing to do at all with the time of Tamuni, but he shows the crowd protesting. Oh dear. Well, he did do murals that were successfully put up in the 30s and the 40s because he began to work for the WPA, Works Projects Administration, and for the Federal Arts Project. And one that you can go see is near Princeton. This one is called the Roosevelt Homestead Project, and it's from the late 30s. It's in a public school in Roosevelt. It was a community, this was formerly called Homestead, founded under FDR. It was for, especially for garment workers as to get them out of the unsavory conditions in Manhattan. And this is a true fresco. This is another way by which he's trying to be a person who appeals to people and works in the way that people of the past had to reach people. So this is painting right in plaster. And the reason otherwise he's using watercolors is that's, again, you know, that's the demonic, the common person's the inexpensive way to work. We'll show you these scenes. We start over here. It's like a it also is like a triptych scene there, 3 parts essentially. Someone said it's almost like the Haggadah. There's a escape, and what is, I'm not, and we get deliverance, and then I think we get work, right? So let's look over here. Now, these would be people in Ellis Island. Down here, there's Sacco and Vanzetti. And then the immigrants coming across the bridge into this country. Here's his mother. Here's Einstein, who was a good friend of his and lived in Homestead for a while. This is a painter that we won't have time for, a painter named Moses Sawyer. And then back here, these women and children sleeping outdoors. That's because of the absolutely squalid, overheated situations in the Lower East Side tenements that people would choose to go spend their nights outside instead. And then, so they get their first employment in the garment district here. So then you have this center section, you're only seeing part of it here. This is this Triangle Shirtwaist factory. That's where there was that appalling fire where all the women were locked in and burnt to death. Then here's labor organizer. He's a sort of a composite of 2 key labor organizers of the time with a text from one of them. And the milling workers listening. I don't know what this represents over here. And then we come to the 3rd one. This is the planning of the community of Roosevelt. There's, you know, our gallant leader, Franklin Roosevelt, their co-op factory that they built there, and the dream of having it being an infinitely extending community, the happy people moving in. And these were all members of the community and recognizable. So he made other, he did a series of murals for Rikers Island that went all the way down the center corridor, and he got permission to go in and photograph people So he did that. He did some for some federal buildings in Washington, D.C., and quite a few murals in a space of about 10 years. But he was also doing other work for the government and other paintings. I'll just show you a few of those. You'd recognize already that this is Ben Shahn, right? Yeah, maybe before I started you would have. This one's just called Unemployed, some workers from 1938, looking here somewhat truculent. Dour and idle. This is a Churchgoers and Me. This he did in the mid-30s. Because this is, I show you this particular painting for one feature out of all of them. Here he is. He takes up photography and he works with a camera with a right angle lens so that people aren't aware that he's photographing them. He had become a friend of Walker Evans earlier. They had been roommates. And as Walker Evans started to photograph, Ben Shahn thought, well, he'd like that too, to build up his repertoire of images for paintings. So Walker Evans promised to teach him, but Walker Evans was going out one day and said, going someplace, and Ben Shahn said, you know, Walker Evans hadn't taught him anything. So Evans evidently said, you know, well, use this f-stop on the sunny side of the street and this f-stop on the shady side, and that's all the advice he got. But he got a job through the government, through this federal arts project. I've got to be sure that I'm not misleading you there. It might be, no, the Farm Security Administration, all these government businesses, you know, to go down south and to document what conditions were like there for the poor farmers, so that the paintings that he would produce and the photographs others were doing, like Walker Evans, would help to sway public opinion to greater support for the New Deal projects to support labor down there. So this is one of the photographs he took, doubtless with that, well, I don't know, from this man, the way he's looking, he might recognize that Shahn is up to something, but I don't think any of them are aware that Shahn is photographing them. This is in Scotts Run, West Virginia. And these are the men without work. And this is the painting he produced from that. It's a tempera. Again, this tempera, you know, is well, it's essentially poster paints. So he's using this inexpensive medium and sort of scrubbing it across the surface here. And then using all this linear detail. Now you notice the photograph is a source. This man is the same, but look how he changes and look how he shifts the angle. Of course, the position of the figures, he's altered the composition. The squinty-eyed look is the same as what the other one has. And here he's sacrificing something that was visible in other photographs he took, which is the very poor housing that these people lived in. And making it, again, art of the people. He often uses texts. So here it's for, some of these are voting, I don't know, yeah, these are all voting posters. These stenciled signs. Man by a railroad track. So there's this kind of like a false naivete in the way it's painted. And then give you a couple of his photographs. That's what he took with that right angle lens. Just so that you should, I felt it was unfair of me not to let you know that his work does not all look like that. From the 30s, here's a painting that's in the Museum of Modern Art he did in 1939. It's called Handball. So it's just boys playing out in the lot, playing handball. And I could not get a large enough reproduction of the actual photograph on which this is based, but this is another one from that series. So you see he eschews that linear patterning here. And this does look like a nice modern canvas almost here at the background, isn't it, with these small details. Everything placed, it's pretty daring painting because all the incident takes around the place around the periphery. And then you just have these shades of white and gray and blue through all of this. That's all painting. Oh, we have a little time to do Jacob Lawrence, who you see is much younger. And it's only because he is precocious in his art that I kept to bring him in at all. But he's another one of Edith Halpert's proteges. He was born in Plainfield, New Jersey. And his mother moved the family up to Harlem in the 20s, which was the peak of the Harlem Renaissance, and he absorbed a whole lot of that. But while his mother went out to work, she sent her children to local community center and to an art school. And the community center is one that Eleanor Roosevelt had recently opened up. Well, in the activities, the things that they could do was, of course, painting. You have art supplies. And Jacob Lawrence took to it. I think I'm going to have to go beyond that one. Now, there were several very fine African-American artists who taught there. Like Charles Alston was one who had a very dignified, reputable training. And there's something that always still sticks in my craw every time I read this and think about this, is that Alston and his other major teacher, a woman named Augusta Savage, who had established some careers, saw in Jacob Lawrence such an ideal, raw native power that they didn't want him to learn the standard ways of art. They did not encourage him to go to art school. He was not taught perspective. He was not taught modeling. He was not taught any of that. And in fact, for himself, he would walk down from Harlem to the Met to go in to see what paintings were like, to see how it was done. But he is just so this is no faux art. This is Lawrence, his native gift. And what he does, oh, he's a marvelous man, and what he says is wonderful too. Well, I really shouldn't step on his teacher, so I won't do that. Oh, he really makes me angry though. But one thing so here's one thing about what Jacob Lawrence says in his work. He says, "My pictures express my life and experiences. I paint the things I know about and the things I have experienced. The things I have experienced extend to my national, racial, and class group. So I paint about the American Negro working class." And all his career long, he stayed with the same materials and means that he learned when he was there at the community center. He used poster paint, paper, and cardboard, sort of like masonite cardboard. And just flat areas of color and drawing. This one is called Harlem Hospital. Free clinic, and it's Chicago Art Institute, but it's about 2 feet across. This has a marvelous ability to differentiate all the people here. And the terrible crowded conditions. This is called Blind Beggars from 38. With these flat dollars, which also sometimes to me look almost as if they were cutouts. But no, these are all just the painted areas. The bold colors, maybe that comes from seeing people in native costume. Not that it was worn that much in the 30s, but there's, oh no, he did also talk about how in the Harlem apartments, people chose bright colors to, in the very unsanitary and cramped quarters, something to bring life to them. This, I think you can imagine the colors are actually much brighter than this. And it's just called The Butcher Shop. So it's just recording the world. Look at these pigeons up here. But what a great sense of design. And I'm really doing it for. We're going to stay here for 3 more minutes and you get a little more. So as he was working and was so aware of the conditions of the people around him, and also aware of the pride in the presented in the intellectuals in the Harlem Renaissance, that he felt the need to reach out. And what he decided to do was to start, like Shahn, to do works in series. And he would spend days going to the public library, which he loved, researching early Black history, because it was not taught. There were no books, nothing. And he thought other people needed to know about it. And so he did a series on the freeing of Haiti. He did a series on Frederick Douglass. The one you all know is the Great Migration series. And between the Frederick Douglass and the Great Migration, he did one on Harriet Tubman, whose photograph you see here. And I thought I'd just show you a couple because they sneak in 3940. The Great Migration, which Edith Halpert was the first person to show and insisted would be sold either all together or it was finally divided between only 2 places. Give her credit, she would not let the images be sold one by one. So she showed that, but this also now is as a series at Hampton University. So I think it was, I don't know if it ever sold, it was kept and then he and his wife gave it to the university. They're small temperate paintings, about 12 by 18 inches. And I'll just give you a couple of the panels. He and his wife would have text for them because they are to be, these are to tell a history. So this one is, the text gets kind of long, but it's poetic. On a hot summer day about 1820, a group of slave children were tumbling in the sandy soil of the state of Maryland. And among them was one, Harriet Tubman, Dorchester County, Maryland. Well, you see the girl here. Here's Harriet Tubman. These are painted in a different way, not that solid blocks of color before. You see, it's kind of like, you see shifts and blues and here. He actually uses a technique with an underlaying of casein, kind of like a gunky pigment underneath, that it would make it look more like a fresco. Then, Harriet Tubman worked as a water girl to field hands. She also worked at plowing, carting, and hauling logs. And look at that change in perspective and scale. Harriet Tubman dreamt of freedom. Arise, flee for your life. And in the visions of the night, she saw the horsemen coming. Beckoning hands were ever motioning her to come. And she seemed to see a line dividing the land of slavery from the land of freedom. And one more. Wow, he's fabulous. This is such an empty image. One bird, one star, one small group of people on this barren hill. Strokes of blue that you see back and forth from the sky. So against that boldness and brevity, he really lets loose with the text. So he's playing them one against the other. In the North, Harriet Tubman worked hard. All her wages she laid away for the one purpose of liberating her people. And as soon as a sufficient amount was secured, she disappeared from her northern home and as mysteriously appeared one dark night at the door of one of the cabins on the plantation, where a group of trembling fugitives was waiting. And there's more, that's not even all the caption. Then she piloted them north, traveling by night, hiding by day, scaling the mountains, wading the rivers, threading the forests. She carrying the babies drugged with paregoric. So she went 19 times, liberating over 300 pieces of living, breathing property. Next time, I couldn't even bear to bring it in as a closing image. I'll show you someone else who's a social realist, but he shows it's what somebody calls the floozies on Broadway and around Union Square. Just a little bit, and then we'll do mainly the photographers who also, like Ben Shahn, are working for the federal government throughout the 30s. So I'll take it out of share mode, and if you have any questions, the hour's up, you can take them.